Karen from the HOA secretly connecting her Tesla charger to my external power outlet, inflating my electricity bill by $300 each month. But stay with me because how my intelligent power defense mechanism transformed her $90,000 vehicle into a worthless battery paperweight is more gratifying than any revenge story you've heard. Share in the comments where you're viewing this from. I suspect many of you should be focused on work right now. Don't worry, your secret's protected with me. And believe me, this narrative is worth your attention. Before I plunge into this electrical catastrophe, let me provide some background. They claim quality boundaries create quality neighbors. But sometimes even the strongest boundaries can't shield you from privileged individuals who believe regulations apply to everyone but themselves. Growing up in a working-class community in the Midwest instilled in me respect for others' belongings, a principle apparently unknown to certain Tesla-driving suburbanites with luxury eyewear and a pathological resistance to covering their own expenses. What unfolds isn't merely a story of power theft, but a meticulously designed lesson in accountability that I remain quite satisfied with today. As my grandfather always said, the most effective instructor for a thief isn't law enforcement, it's the unforeseen snare. When Rebecca Sterling relocated to the adjacent house with her pristine white Tesla Model X, I had no clue she'd become my personal nightmare. I'm Marcus Thompson, a 35-year-old electrical engineer working remotely for a technology firm in Seattle. My experience encompasses 6 years with the Army Corps of Engineers, where I concentrated on power grid systems and security infrastructure before transitioning to civilian employment. Military service taught me discipline, accuracy, and problem-solving abilities that would prove unexpectedly valuable in suburban conflict. I've resided in Oakwood Gardens, a peaceful suburban community with an active homeowners association, for approximately 3 years now. I'd purchased the residence after my divorce. Nothing dramatic, just two people recognizing they desired different futures. I'd been enjoying the tranquil routine of my new single life. It's a pleasant enough location with maintained lawns, community cookouts in summer, and neighbors who typically respect boundaries. Or at least that's how things were before Hurricane Rebecca made impact. Reflecting back, I should have recognized the warning indicators when the previous owners of her house practically abandoned the neighborhood, selling substantially below market value just to relocate quickly for employment opportunities. Now I understand they probably wanted to escape before construction on Rebecca's backyard infinity pool commenced. I initially encountered Rebecca when I brought over a welcome package, some local craft beer, artisan chocolates, and neighborhood information. I'm not naturally outgoing, but my mother instilled old-fashioned Midwestern courtesy that persists. "How considerate," Rebecca said with a rehearsed smile that didn't reach her eyes as she accepted my modest gesture. She wore what I'd recognize as her standard uniform: designer yoga attire that had never seen an actual yoga studio, a cashmere sweater despite warm weather, and sufficient jewelry to trigger metal detectors at 50 yards. As she invited me for a brief tour of her newly renovated home, I couldn't help noticing how she emphasized words like premium, exclusive, and top tier when describing every fixture and appliance. The house had undergone complete transformation from the modest 4-bedroom colonial it had been into what Rebecca clearly considered a suburban mansion. "This kitchen island is imported Italian marble," she explained, running her manicured fingers across the countertop larger than my entire kitchen. "We waited 6 months, but Marcus, that's my husband, he insisted only the finest for our forever home. He's a corporate attorney, very accomplished." She managed mentioning his profession and success 3 additional times during the 15-minute tour. Her expression shifted when she inquired about my place, her eyes narrowing as though evaluating a potential threat, or more likely determining I wasn't worth significant consideration. "Oh, you've lived in your charming little house long?" The way she said charming made it sound like she was describing a gas station restroom. When I mentioned being an engineer, her interest visibly diminished. Apparently, if you weren't a physician, attorney, or investment manager, you barely registered on Rebecca Sterling's social radar. That initial interaction should have been my warning, a screaming alert I foolishly disregarded. In subsequent weeks, Rebecca launched what I can only describe as a calculated community conquest campaign. She quickly ingratiated herself with the HOA board through combining flattery, intimidation, and strategic generosity. Her elaborate dinner parties became legendary, not for conversation, but for obscenely expensive wine she served and subtle name-dropping that peppered her dinner conversations. Within 6 weeks of moving in, she had somehow managed getting herself elected as HOA vice president. Despite being completely new to the community, the previous vice president, a retired elementary school principal named Dorothy who'd served faithfully for 7 years, suddenly resigned, citing personal reasons. I later discovered from Helen that those personal reasons included Rebecca discovering and threatening to expose Dorothy's son's past DUI to the community. During this period, I maintained my privacy, mostly occupied with work projects and occasional gaming sessions with online friends. My job designing power management systems for commercial buildings kept me busy during days, and my modest social life filled evenings. I noticed Rebecca's rapid ascent to neighborhood authority, but frankly, HOA politics had always seemed like a special kind of torment I preferred avoiding. My philosophy was simple: pay dues, follow reasonable rules, and live peacefully. That changed when I received my electric bill 1 month after Rebecca moved in. Opening that envelope felt like getting sucker punched. $450, nearly triple my usual $150. Initially, I assumed it was an error and contacted the power company. The representative confirmed the reading was accurate and suggested I might have a malfunctioning appliance or had significantly altered usage patterns. I checked and double-checked my consumption, wondering if I'd accidentally left something running, but everything appeared normal. I even circulated through the house with an electricity usage monitor, testing each major appliance, but found nothing explaining the dramatic increase. The mystery deepened when my neighboring couple, the Andersons, mentioned casually that their bill remained consistent. Whatever was draining my power was specific to my property. It wasn't until a week later, when my home security camera sent a notification at 2 a.m., that I discovered what was happening. I groggily checked my phone and nearly tumbled from bed when I saw Rebecca Sterling dressed in designer pajamas and silk robes sneaking across my backyard with a lengthy extension cord. She plugged it into my outdoor outlet, the one I use for yard work, and ran the cord along our property line, cleverly concealed by shrubs she had suggested the HOA plant for enhanced neighborhood aesthetics. The other end connected to her Tesla, parked in her side driveway, positioned precisely so the charging port faced our shared fence line. I watched in disbelief as she verified everything was connected, glanced around furtively, then scurried back into her house like some electricity-stealing gremlin. The following morning, I knocked on her door, phone in hand with the video ready. When Rebecca answered, wearing an expensive-looking tennis outfit and bright smile, I cut directly to the point. "Rebecca, we need to discuss you using my electricity to charge your Tesla." Her smile didn't waver for even a second. "I have no idea what you're referring to, Marcus," she said with a dismissive laugh. I showed her the video, and her expression hardened like quick-setting concrete. "That could be anyone," she said, despite crystal-clear footage of her face. "And honestly, if your electrical system is so poorly designed that it's causing such high bills, perhaps you should consider upgrading. After all, maintaining property values is important to all of us in Oakwood." Before closing the door, she added with a honeyed voice, barely concealing her threat, "As HOA Vice President, I'd be happy to discuss your landscaping violations sometime. Your hedges are 2 inches above regulation height." As I walked back to my house, I knew this was just beginning. What I didn't know was that this was merely the opening act in a 6-month battle where I'd learned that not all Karens are created equal. Some are far more dangerous than those in viral videos. After discovering Rebecca's midnight power theft, I took what I thought were reasonable precautions. I installed additional security cameras around my property and put lock boxes over my outdoor outlets. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Within 48 hours, I received an official HOA violation notice in my mailbox claiming my unauthorized exterior modifications. The lock boxes were against community guidelines and had to be removed immediately. The letter was signed by Gregory Palmer, the HOA inspector, but I recognized Rebecca's handiwork. Gregory was a 58-year-old former middle manager who'd been laid off during corporate downsizing and now wielded his clipboard and rule book with the righteous fervor of a crusader. He appeared at my door the following day, chest puffed importantly. Mr. Thompson, I'm here to ensure compliance with the removal notice you received. I tried explaining about Rebecca stealing electricity, even showing him security footage, but his expression remained impassive. That's a private dispute between neighbors, he said firmly. The HOA doesn't get involved in such matters. However, these unapproved lockboxes are definitely within my jurisdiction. When I reluctantly removed the lockboxes under his watchful gaze, I caught a whiff of expensive cologne and noticed his new designer watch. Later, I learned from another neighbor that Rebecca had been hosting appreciation happy hours for HOA board members, where scotch flowed as freely as her compliments. That weekend, I decided attending the monthly HOA meeting for the first time since moving in. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse where about 30 homeowners gathered in uncomfortable folding chairs. When the floor opened for resident concerns, I raised my hand and began explaining the situation with documentation in hand. I'd like to address an issue regarding unauthorized use of private electricity. But before I could finish, Rebecca interrupted smoothly. Point of order, she called out. Personal disputes aren't appropriate for general meeting agenda. They should be submitted in writing to the board first. The HOA president, a balding man named Frank who seemed perpetually confused, nodded in agreement. Yes, procedure must be followed. Please submit your concern in writing and we'll review it at the next board meeting. As I sat down frustrated, Rebecca gave me a smug smile from her seat at the board table. Then came the real bombshell of the evening. Next agenda item, Frank announced, approval for installation of community charging stations in common areas. My attention snapped back to the meeting as Rebecca stood up with a glossy presentation folder. As we all know, green energy is the future, she began with practiced enthusiasm. I propose we install 4 level 2 charging stations near the community center parking area. This improvement will increase property values and show Oakwood Gardens is an environmentally conscious community. What she conveniently failed mentioning was that one proposed station would be located just yards from her house in the common area adjacent to my property. After the meeting, I lingered to review the proposal documents and discovered something that made my blood boil. The electricity costs for these charging stations would be billed to the HOA and distributed equally among all residents as part of our monthly dues. In other words, Rebecca had found a way to make the entire neighborhood pay for charging her Tesla. When I looked at the installation plans for new outlets, an uncomfortable reality hit me. This wasn't just between me and Rebecca anymore. She had turned the entire neighborhood into a free energy source for her expensive car. And worse still, they didn't even know they were being scammed. I needed to understand what I was up against. So I spent the next few weeks researching HOA regulations, local laws, and electrical codes. If I was going to fight Rebecca, I needed to know the rules better than she did. My military engineering background helped. I'd learned that in any battle, intelligence is as important as firepower. I discovered that while HOAs had considerable power over external property appearance, there were limits to their authority, especially regarding utilities and safety measures. During my investigations, I met Helen Wilson, a 68-year-old widow who'd lived in Oakwood Gardens since it was built. Helen had sharp eyes, a sharper tongue, and seemingly knew everything about everyone. That sterling woman, she said over coffee at her kitchen table, she's got half the board eating out of her hand like trained poodles. Helen had been keeping meticulous notes on HOA activities for years and showed me how previous board members had been pressured to resign when they opposed certain measures. Gregory isn't a bad man, she confided, just weak and easily flattered. Been that way since his wife left him for her yoga instructor. And Frank, the president? He's just counting days until his term ends so he can move to Florida. Through Helen, I also met David and Lisa Rodriguez, a couple in their 40s with 2 young kids. David worked as a high school teacher, and Lisa was a nurse at the local hospital. They were struggling with increasing HOA fees and were particularly concerned about the proposed charging stations. We can barely keep up with current dues, Lisa explained when I visited their home one evening. Another increase would mean cutting back on Emma's dance classes. Their daughter, an energetic 8-year-old, was currently showing my security camera footage to her younger brother, both giggling at the lady stealing electricity like a bad guy in a movie. With their help, I began building a case and gathering supporters. I discreetly installed a power monitoring device on my electrical panel to document exactly how much electricity Rebecca was using, an average of 75 kilowatt hours each night, which at our local rates translated to substantial money over time. David and Lisa helped me collect signatures from other homeowners concerned about rising HOA costs, while Helen provided crucial information about HOA bylaws that could help our cause. By the time the next HOA meeting approached, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier, video evidence, power consumption data, cost calculations, and signatures from 23 households opposing the charging station proposal without proper individual metering. I felt prepared, confident even. The evening before the meeting, I was reviewing my presentation one last time when Helen called. "Marcus, the meeting's been postponed," she said, her voice tight with anger. "They're claiming technical issues with the clubhouse projector, but I just drove by and saw Rebecca's car parked outside Frank's house. Something's happening." I stood there with a thick folder of evidence in my hands, watching as Rebecca whispered to board members the following day in the community mailbox area. It was then I realized sometimes you can't win playing by others' rules. Perhaps it was time to create a protection system, one that a former military engineer with expertise in electrical systems could design. The next morning, I decided to give Rebecca one last chance to end this peacefully. I had always believed in direct communication before escalation, a principle that had served me well in the military and in life generally. I walked over to her house with my documentation in hand. Videos, photographs, and calculations of electricity costs, all neatly organized in a professional-looking folder. Their home, which had already been impressive when they moved in, now featured new landscaping with imported Japanese maples and a completely redesigned front entrance with hand-carved double doors that must have cost more than my first car. Marcus, her husband, opened the door this time. He was a tall, perpetually distracted-looking man in his mid-40s, with the kind of expensive haircut that tries desperately to hide early balding, and the tan complexion of someone who plays golf not for enjoyment, but for business connections. He was dressed in an expensive suit despite it being Saturday, the subtle pinstripes and monogrammed cuffs screaming, "I bill at $500 an hour." I had only seen him a handful of times since they moved in. He seemed to leave early and return late most days, the quintessential absent corporate warrior. "Rebecca's at her Pilates class," he said, checking his watch impatiently, a Rolex that caught the morning light. "Can this wait?" His tone suggested that whatever I had to say couldn't possibly be important enough to interrupt his schedule. I explained that it couldn't and showed him the evidence of his wife's activities. Marcus reluctantly invited me into their marble-floored entryway, but no further, making it clear this wasn't a social call. He skimmed through the photos with barely concealed boredom, flipping through my meticulously prepared documentation as if it were a takeout menu from a restaurant he had no intention of ordering from. "Look," he finally said, handing back the folder without even looking at the cost calculations. "I'm sure there's some misunderstanding. It's just a few dollars of electricity, not worth getting worked up about." His dismissive tone made it clear that what was a significant sum to me was pocket change to him. The kind of person who wouldn't bend down to pick up a $20 bill because it wasn't worth his time, before I could explain that it was much more than a few dollars and that the principle of stealing was the real issue. He glanced at his phone and frowned, using it as an obvious excuse to end our conversation. "I have a call with Tokyo in 5 minutes," he said, already backing toward his home office visible down the hallway. "Why don't you two work this out like adults and maybe don't make such a big deal over trivial neighborhood stuff?" He closed the door before I could respond, leaving me standing on his porch with my folder of evidence and a growing realization that both Sterlings shared the same fundamental character flaw: a complete inability to see beyond their own convenience and privilege. That afternoon, Rebecca came storming across our adjoining lawns, designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly highlighted hair. "How dare you go behind my back to Marcus?" she hissed, careful to keep her voice down so other neighbors wouldn't hear. I remained calm, explaining again that she needed to stop using my electricity and that I would oppose her charging station scheme at the next HOA meeting. Her face flushed with anger. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Marcus is one of the top corporate attorneys in the state. One word from him and your little remote job could disappear. One complaint about threatening behavior, and that military history of yours might not look so heroic. The threat was clear. Back off or she'd make my life difficult in ways I couldn't imagine. In the days that followed, I began noticing strange glances from neighbors who had previously been friendly. At the local grocery store, people who normally stopped to chat suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. The mystery was solved when David Rodriguez called to cancel our planned strategy meeting. "I'm sorry, man," he said awkwardly. "There's a rumor going around that you've been unstable since your military days. Something about you becoming obsessed with Rebecca and stalking her property at night." I was stunned into silence. Rebecca had flipped the script entirely, using my own security measures against me. "Lisa and I know it's not true," David hastily added, "but some people are keeping their distance. They're saying you installed those cameras to watch her, not to catch her stealing electricity." I organized a small meeting at my house with supporters, but only Helen and the Rodriguez family showed up. Others had sent apologetic texts citing various commitments. As we discussed our dwindling options, Helen revealed more disturbing news. She's convinced the board to authorize enhanced landscaping services for the common area near your house, she explained grimly. The work will generate extra noise starting at 7 a.m. every day, including weekends. The cost will be added to your monthly dues as a special assessment, since it primarily benefits your property line. That night, after everyone left, I sat in my garage workshop and considered my options. As an electrical engineer with military experience in power systems, I knew there were ways to protect my property that wouldn't violate any laws or HOA regulations. I decided to install a smart power security system, a perfectly legal device commonly used in industrial settings to protect against power theft and electrical anomalies. The system would detect unauthorized power usage during unusual hours and could automatically shut off if it detected excessive usage or irregular patterns. It would also deliver a small voltage fluctuation warning before complete shutdown, just enough to alert the user, but not enough to cause any safety concerns under normal circumstances. I spent the next few days assembling the components and programming the system. My garage turned into a workshop as I meticulously tested each component. This wasn't just some jury-rigged contraption. I applied the same engineering standards I used in my professional work. The SPS included multiple safety features: voltage monitoring, current detection, time of use restrictions, and most importantly, a 3-stage warning system that would activate well before any protective measures kicked in. I programmed the system to record all electrical activity and keep detailed logs of any unusual patterns, details that would prove critical later. The hardware itself was elegantly simple yet robust. Industrial-grade components housed in a weatherproof enclosure that could withstand the Pacific Northwest's notorious rain. I even added battery backup so the system would remain operational during power outages. This wasn't excessive. It was professional. If I was going to protect my property, I'd do it right. After 3 days of development and testing, I installed the system at the back of my property where I knew Rebecca accessed her favorite outlet. I carefully mounted it according to all electrical code requirements and added a clear, professionally printed warning sign. Protected by SPSS, authorized use only. Unauthorized use may damage connected devices. The sign included standard electrical warning symbols and was illuminated by a small LED for nighttime visibility. No one could claim they hadn't seen it. I even took timestamp photographs of the installation to document everything was properly set up and clearly marked. I made absolutely certain the system was fully compliant with electrical codes and safety standards. The last thing I wanted was legal liability. I reviewed National Electrical Code specifications twice and consulted with a buddy who worked as a city inspector to confirm everything was up to code. The system was designed not to harm people or property under normal use. It would only activate protective measures after multiple warnings were ignored, and even then, it would simply create a controlled fluctuation before safely disconnecting. Any damage would result only from someone deliberately overriding safety warnings. Essentially, they would have to work hard to harm their own equipment. As I tested the SPSP one final time on a cool Tuesday evening, watching the diagnostic LEDs blink in sequence confirming proper operation, I wondered if Rebecca had ever learned the basic principle of physics that every engineering student knows by heart. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. In the military, we had another saying, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Rebecca was about to learn both lessons simultaneously. The morning after installing my SPSP, I watched through my kitchen window as Rebecca noticed the new setup during her daily property inspection walk. She paused by the warning sign, squinting to read it, then rolled her eyes dramatically. That evening, I received another HOA violation notice, this time for unauthorized signage. But since the warning was a required safety notification for electrical systems under county regulations, I knew it couldn't be removed. I submitted the appropriate documentation, citing the relevant codes, and for once, Gregory couldn't argue with actual legal requirements. For the next few days, my security cameras showed Rebecca eyeing the outlet but not using it. I wondered if the warning had actually worked, but Helen kept me updated on Rebecca's movements around the neighborhood. She's testing outlets near the clubhouse now, Helen reported after her evening walk. But they're not powerful enough for fast charging, and she has to park too far from her house for comfort. I felt a small victory until I received notification that the HOA board had approved emergency funding for upgraded electrical infrastructure in the common areas, bypassing the normal resident voting process by classifying it as an essential safety improvement. The following week, workmen installed new high-capacity outlets in the common area bordering my property and Rebecca's, exactly as she had planned all along, but now expedited as an emergency measure. That night, my security system alerted me to movement, and I watched as Rebecca smugly connected her Tesla to one of the new community outlets, giving a little satisfied wave toward my camera before strutting back to her house. The SPSP immediately began recording data on this new power usage pattern, confirming my suspicions. She was drawing enormous power during off-peak hours, and the cost would be distributed among all residents. I expanded the SPSS to monitor the new community outlets as well, not to control them as they weren't on my property, but to gather data on usage patterns. The system revealed that Rebecca was charging her car between 1 and 4 a.m. every night, drawing maximum power for 3 straight hours. At current electricity rates, she was adding approximately $500 monthly to the combined HOA bill. Meanwhile, I continued receiving petty violation notices. My mailbox was half an inch too low. My garage door needed repainting, despite being painted just last year. And my garbage cans were visible from the street for 15 minutes too long on collection day. I carefully complied with each minor violation while documenting everything and continuing to gather support among neighbors. The Rodriguez family had started showing my data to trusted friends, and slowly a network of concerned homeowners was forming. Through Helen's connections, I learned that Rebecca was planning something bigger, a proposal for an official Tesla supercharger station in the community center parking lot, with installation costs of $25,000 to be covered by a special assessment on all homeowners. The proposal would be introduced at the rescheduled HOA meeting in 2 weeks. One evening, as I was reviewing the SPSP data, I noticed something interesting. Whenever Rebecca charged her Tesla, she would set it to draw maximum power immediately, bypassing the car's built-in gradual power ramp-up. This was unusual and potentially harmful to both the vehicle and the electrical system. The Tesla's battery management system was designed to handle standard charging patterns, not the aggressive power-grabbing Rebecca seemed to prefer. My SPSS was programmed to identify abnormal usage patterns and respond with warning signals before implementing protective measures. Given Rebecca's charging habits, the system would likely interpret her behavior as potentially damaging. I made no changes to the default safety protocols. They were standard industrial protections. But I ensured all warning systems were clearly visible and audible. The night before the rescheduled HOA meeting, my security camera alerted me to movement at 1 a.m., Rebecca's usual charging time. I watched as she approached her favorite community outlet with her Tesla gleaming under the moonlight. The SPSP detected the connection and the immediate power surge as she set the car to maximum charge rate. Just as programmed, the system activated its warning protocol. A small yellow light began flashing on the outlet box, and a low beeping sound indicated abnormal power draw. Instead of reducing the charge rate or disconnecting, Rebecca noticed the warning light, frowned, and then deliberately increased the charge rate further, as if challenging the system. I watched in disbelief as she smirked at what she clearly thought was my attempt to scare her off. The SPSP responded exactly as designed. After 3 warning cycles, it detected the dangerous power surge and enacted its protection protocol, creating a controlled voltage fluctuation before cutting power entirely. I checked the data display on my monitoring system. The SPSS had functioned correctly. It had warned before taking protective action, but Rebecca had not only ignored the warnings, but increased the risk by cranking up the power draw to dangerous levels. I received a notification from my security camera. Rebecca was standing beside her Tesla, completely still, eyes wide, as she stared at the error message displayed on her car's screen. Now she understood. Property protection systems were not a bluff. The next morning I was making coffee when furious pounding shook my front door. Through the peephole I could see Rebecca still in her silk pajamas, her face contorted with rage. "Open this door right now, you vindictive little man!" she shouted loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. I calmly opened the door, coffee mug in hand. "Good morning, Rebecca. Is everything okay?" Her eyes were wild as she jabbed a finger at my chest. "You know damn well everything is not okay. You destroyed my car. My Tesla is bricked, completely dead, and the diagnostic system says it's because of a power surge. You did this." Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, watching the confrontation from their driveways. I maintained my composure, speaking clearly so the gathering audience could hear. I installed a standard smart power security system to prevent unauthorized use of electricity, with clearly posted warnings about potential risks of misuse. Did something happen to your car while you were using community power at 1 a.m.? Rebecca's face flushed as she realized people were watching. "You deliberately sabotaged my car," she hissed more quietly. "It's going to cost $22,000 to replace the battery management system. Marcus is calling our lawyer right now." "I'd be happy to explain the system to your lawyer," I replied, retrieving the documentation for my SPSS from just inside the door. "Here's the technical specifications, safety certifications, and warning notifications. The system is designed to protect against unauthorized usage and dangerous power conditions. Exactly what occurred when you ignored the warning lights and increased the power draw instead of disconnecting." I gestured toward my security camera. "I have footage of you ignoring the warning signals and deliberately increasing the charge rate, which triggered the safety protocol. The system functioned exactly as designed and certified." Marcus arrived 20 minutes later in his Mercedes, phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call as he approached us, looking annoyed at the whole situation. "Marcus," he nodded curtly, "Rebecca tells me you've damaged our Tesla with some homemade electrical trap." I handed him the technical documentation without comment. Unlike his wife, Marcus actually read it, his frown deepening as he flipped through the pages. "This says the system has clear warning indicators that activate before any protective measures," he noted, looking at Rebecca. "Did you see any warnings?" Rebecca sputtered about irrelevant blinking lights. As Marcus continued scanning the documents, when I offered to show him the video of Rebecca ignoring the warnings, he held up his hand. "That won't be necessary yet." I decided to lay all my cards on the table. "Marcus, your wife has been stealing electricity from me personally and now from the community for months. I've documented everything, including how she manipulated the HOA to install charging outlets at community expense primarily for her benefit. I have videos, power consumption data, and testimony from other residents. I attempted to resolve this directly with both of you multiple times. I watched as the lawyer and him calculated the situation. Additionally, I should mention that misuse of HOA funds for personal benefit could potentially be considered fraud, especially when someone in a leadership position directs community resources primarily for their own use." Marcus's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "I see." He turned to Rebecca, whose righteous anger had morphed into uncertainty. "We need to discuss this at home. Now." As they walked away, I heard him mutter, $22,000. Are you kidding me? And you've been doing what with HOA funds? Later that afternoon, Rebecca's precious Tesla was loaded onto a flatbed tow truck bound for the nearest service center. The preliminary diagnostic report confirmed significant damage to the battery management system, with repairs estimated at $22,000. Worse for Rebecca, the damage wasn't covered under warranty because it was classified as resulting from improper charging practices and disregarding safety warnings. As the car was towed away, Rebecca turned to me with hatred in her eyes. "You haven't won yet, Marcus. The HOA will back me on this." I smiled. "Actually, I think we need to meet at the special HOA meeting I've just requested. I believe everyone would be very interested in seeing these videos and learning who they've been paying electricity for all these months." The special HOA meeting was held the following week in the community clubhouse with record attendance. The tension in the air was palpable as neighbors who normally only exchange casual waves at the mailbox now sat shoulder to shoulder, whispering in small groups. Nearly every household was represented, with people standing along the walls after all chairs were filled. I arrived 15 minutes early to set up my presentation and was surprised to find Helen already there, organizing a stack of documents with military precision. "Just some light reading material," she winked, sliding a copy my way. It was a complete record of every HOA financial decision for the past 6 months, annotated with relevant bylaw sections that had been violated. Helen had been preparing for this showdown longer than I realized. Frank, the HOA president, a balding man with perpetually sweaty palms who'd been looking forward to retirement in Florida before getting entangled in Rebecca's schemes, looked nervous as he called the meeting to order. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his reading glasses, especially when he noticed Helen distributing her printouts to attendees. Rebecca sat in the front row wearing an outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment, her arms crossed and expression stormy. Marcus was conspicuously absent. Apparently, Tokyo needed him again. "We have a special presentation tonight," Frank stammered, his voice cracking slightly as he avoided Rebecca's laser-like glare from the front row. "Marcus Thompson has requested time to address a community concern." The room fell silent as I walked to the front, laptop in hand. I felt calm, prepared. This wasn't so different from military briefings I'd given, except the stakes were personal. As I connected my computer to the projector, I noticed David and Lisa Rodriguez giving me encouraging thumbs up from their seats, their children beside them, with coloring books to keep them occupied during what promised to be a lengthy adult discussion. I had asked David earlier if the meeting was appropriate for kids, and he'd responded, "They should see that standing up to bullies works," which pretty much summed up why I liked the Rodriguez family. I connected my laptop to the projector and began methodically presenting my evidence. Security videos of Rebecca stealing electricity, power consumption data, and detailed calculations of costs. "For the past 6 months," I explained, "the Sterling household has been using approximately 75 kilowatt hours of electricity nightly from community sources. At current rates, that's roughly $500 monthly added to our collective HOA bills." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as I displayed a graph showing HOA fee increases, coinciding perfectly with Rebecca's charging habits. "Furthermore," I continued, "the recent emergency electrical upgrades were pushed through without proper voting, specifically to facilitate this ongoing abuse of community resources." I also explained the SPSSI had installed, demonstrating that it was a standard industrial protection system with proper certifications and warning mechanisms. When unauthorized usage is detected, the system provides clear visual and audible warnings before initiating any protective measures. Unfortunately, these warnings were deliberately ignored, resulting in damage to the connected device. I played the video showing Rebecca not only ignoring the warning lights, but actually increasing the power draw in apparent defiance. Rebecca jumped to her feet, face flushed. "This is character assassination. He's been harassing me for months with his cameras. And now this ridiculous presentation. The board should remind everyone that unauthorized recordings of board members is against HOA policy." But her usual air of authority had evaporated. From the back of the room, David Rodriguez stood up. "My family has been struggling to pay the increased HOA fees," he said quietly. "We had to pull our daughter from dance classes because we couldn't afford the equipment and fees on top of these charges. Are you saying we've been paying to charge your Tesla all this time?" Other residents began speaking up. Elderly residents on fixed incomes, young families stretching their budgets, all affected by the increased costs. Gregory Palmer, the HOA inspector, who had been so quick to cite me for violations, was conspicuously silent, staring at his clipboard as though it might shield him from the community's growing anger. Marcus Sterling wasn't present, having suddenly discovered an important business trip that couldn't be postponed. Frank attempted to regain control of the meeting. Perhaps we should form a committee to investigate these allegations, but was interrupted by Helen Wilson's commanding voice. I move for an immediate vote to require full restitution of all misappropriated funds, removal of Rebecca Sterling from the HOA board, and a new election for all board positions. The motion was seconded by at least a dozen voices at once. The vote wasn't even close. The community overwhelmingly supported all three measures, with only Rebecca and two loyal friends opposing. The final tally: Rebecca would repay approximately $7,000 in electricity costs. She was removed from the board effective immediately, and a special election would be held the following month. David Rodriguez was nominated as a candidate for the new board president on a platform of transparency and fairness. In the aftermath, changes came swiftly to Oakwood Gardens. The community seemed to collectively exhale as if freed from a spell. Rebecca and Marcus put their house on the market within 2 weeks, listing it well below market value for a quick sale. The rumor mill, primarily powered by Helen's extensive network, reported they were relocating to another state where a cousin of Marcus's had connections to an exclusive gated community, presumably one with better electricity security measures. Their moving day was notably quiet, with no neighbors offering to help or bringing customary farewell gifts. The only person who showed up was Helen, who sat in a lawn chair across the street, knitting and occasionally raising her teacup in a mock toast whenever Rebecca looked her way. Gregory resigned as HOA inspector, citing health concerns. Though everyone knew his real condition was acute embarrassment, he eventually apologized to several homeowners he had unfairly cited and now keeps such a low profile that some new residents don't even know who he is. Frank accelerated his retirement plans and moved to Florida 3 months ahead of schedule, seemingly relieved to escape the neighborhood drama. The new board, led by David, implemented sweeping changes focused on transparency and fairness. They revised regulations for community utilities, including a completely new accounting system that itemized exactly where every dollar of HOA fees went. The board installed official electric vehicle charging stations with individual metering so users paid for their own electricity, a project I helped design as my contribution to the community. The stations were modern, efficient, and most importantly, fair. Within 6 months, 3 other residents purchased electric vehicles, knowing they could now charge them ethically and conveniently. I declined an offer to join the new HOA board, despite numerous neighbors encouraging me to run. Committee meetings and parliamentary procedure weren't really my style, but I agreed to serve as a technical advisor for the community's security and energy systems. This arrangement suited me perfectly. I could contribute my expertise without sitting through hours of discussions about appropriate mailbox decorations or authorized shades of beige for exterior paint. The Rodriguez family's daughter rejoined her dance classes, with the team going on to win the regional competition that summer. Lisa organized a community watch program that actually focused on genuine security issues rather than policing minor rule infractions. Helen started a community garden in the common area where residents could grow vegetables and flowers, transforming a previously unused space into something that brought people together. The house next door eventually sold to a young doctor and her programmer husband, who turned out to be ideal neighbors, friendly but respectful of privacy, quiet but sociable at community events. They drive a modest hybrid and actually asked permission before installing a small fountain that technically exceeded the water feature size regulations, which the new board promptly approved. Every time I drive past the spot where Rebecca used to park her Tesla, I can't help but smile. Today, there's an official charging station there with a dedicated meter and transparent payment system. The irony isn't lost on me. Rebecca could have had exactly what she wanted if she'd just gone about it honestly and fairly. Instead, her entitlement cost her $22,000 in repairs, $7,000 in restitution, and whatever they lost in the rushed home sale. Sometimes people who rely on power and privilege forget an important lesson. Not all victims are helpless. An electrical engineer with knowledge of protection systems can be the most expensive lesson a Karen who thinks she can take whatever she wants without consequences will ever learn. There's a certain poetry to it. Rebecca came into our community like a storm, disrupting lives and bending rules to her will, only to be undone by the very electricity she tried to steal. As Helen told me over coffee recently, her wise eyes twinkling over her reading glasses, you know what they say. Karma doesn't need Wi-Fi to connect to people who deserve it. I couldn't agree more. Sometimes justice comes through official channels, and sometimes it arrives in a carefully engineered package with warning lights that entitled people really should pay attention to. The best part? The community is stronger now. People talk to each other more, look out for one another, and the transparency of the new board has restored trust that the previous leadership had eroded. We're not perfect. No neighborhood is. But we've learned that standing together against bullies works at any age. And if there's one thing I've learned from this whole experience, it's that electrical engineering skills might not make you the life of the party, but they sure come in handy when you need to teach someone about the true cost of power. Thanks for watching HOA Unleashed.